Coach in Love Part 2 definitely has some good moments, but it's not one of my favourite episodes. And the fact that the intro, the recapping from the previous episode, is over 6 minutes long, it takes up more than a quarter of the episode, definitely suggests that this really didn't need to be stretched out to two parts. I love Cheers, so I don't mind watching it. There are some good bits in it, but generally speaking, I feel like making this a two-parter wasn't the best decision. This is the 7th episode of the 3rd season, directed, of course, by the wonderful James Burrows, and there will be spoilers for this episode and, of course, the previous episode, but I won't spoil anything that happens in future episodes. Now, interestingly, this actually takes place about 3 weeks after the previous episode. It doesn't pick up exactly where the other one left off, and we have a 6 minute, I timed it, well actually I went back and looked at the time, a 6 minute intro where various Cheers characters are recapping, and it's done in a pretty creative way because we see the exteriors of their homes. And this is a little bit different because up until this point, we had no idea where Norm lived, where Cliff lived, and we see, well, they do voiceovers of the recaps, and I didn't know Norm had a dog. I don't think that's been mentioned before. And we see Cliff's house. I don't know if that's the house he's just bought from Norm or not. I can't remember if it was mentioned again. But it was different. It was a different way to introduce the episode. But the fact that this went on for 6 minutes, well, after the initial opening, this went on up until about the 6 minute mark. And it really didn't need to. I know that obviously back in the day these episodes were airing once a week, you couldn't binge watch them. A recap is essential, but not for a quarter of the episode. But then eventually we get to Coach and we learn that Coach is still not just hopeful but adamant that the wedding is going ahead even though Irene hasn't talked to him. And it's pretty clear that she's not interested in pursuing this. And it kind of breaks my heart through the whole episode with how certain Coach is that despite Irene's lottery win, things haven't changed. Now, to give Irene credit where it's due, and as I said, spoilers for things in this episode, she does return to Cheers, and she gives a pretty honest speech to Coach about how the fact that this money has changed her, and it's changed her outlook and her experiences, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that she's been honest about it and that she's not just going to marry Coach and then, change her lifestyle knowing that it's not the life Coach would want. I'm not saying she broke off the engagement for selfless reasons, but I think it was a very positive thing for her to do, all things considered. But despite that, it still broke my heart seeing Coach all dressed up smartly, looking forward to his wedding, asking Sam to be his best man. I just want Coach to be happy. And also the fact that Nicholas Colasanto was really unwell at this point, it doesn't help with the emotional aspect of it at all. He definitely wasn't looking his best, put it that way. And it's just a really emotional episode. The only thing I didn't really understand about this was the fact that the Cheers gang were annoyed with how Irene was treating Coach. But this was after the fact that she'd come to Cheers, was very honest about the situation, broke off the engagement, end of story. But they got annoyed at her for how she was treating him afterwards. But she wasn't treating Coach anyway. As far as she was concerned, that was the end of things. So I don't really understand where they were coming from. I get that they were trying to protect Coach, but I don't think Irene was doing anything wrong after that point. She'd made it clear what was happening or what wasn't happening. And that, as far as she was concerned, was the end of things. But I can't complain with everybody trying to protect Coach. I think that that's really lovely and really sweet. And I just don't like seeing Coach being hurt. The thing with the phone call and, Coach saying what he needed to say to her, I think deep down he probably knew that that wasn't Irene, and that's why he didn't give the caller a chance to speak or respond, but it gave him a chance to say what he needed to say, allowing himself to also believe that she'd heard it. And he could draw a line under it and move on. And I think it would have been a very therapeutic thing. And I think that was a really strong way to end the episode. Also with Sam and Diane not answering the phone the second time it rang. it's better to believe what you need to believe to move on and heal than to face what is probably the truth. And it was probably Vera looking for Norm, let's face it. So I think it was a good way to end the episode. It isn't a particularly funny episode, but there are a couple of funny moments, and my favourite my favourite is when Sam and Diane are bickering again, getting at each other, very playfully, of course, and Carla just screams, and it was fantastic, and I absolutely loved it, and it was a little bit of comedy right when we needed it most. But it isn't otherwise the funniest episode. I think most of the comedy is in the beginning, when we have the various characters doing their voiceovers to recap. I still stand by the fact that it didn't really need to be a two-parter. I think they could have tightened up the first part of the episode, maybe having the lottery win within the first 2/3 of the episode, and then allowing Coach to go through the motions within the final third of the episode, and not having it span over the course of 3 weeks. So I didn't love that it was a two-parter. I would have loved this to have been an opportunity for a different story. But as I said, I don't dislike the episode as such, and I'm still happy to watch it. As a Cheers fan, I still enjoyed it. I don't think it was their best decision, but ultimately, Coach in Love Part 2, it's not a bad episode.